Morning. He is coming to judge the earth. There we go. There's a title. I like that one. Which is Psalm 96. Right? So let's start there. I just want to highlight three things quickly briefly from Psalm 96. And we're going to move on to the Luke passage and sort of see what happens when we get there. I want to highlight three things from Psalm 96. And the first is the nations. He is coming to judge the earth, the nations and the peoples. These words, these phrases are all used in Psalm 96. And usually when they're used in the Old Testament, it's about them. Them peoples, them nations, them other people. Right? And there's something we're supposed to do in verse 3. In Psalm 96, verse 3, it says, "Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among the people." And so this is our response to the nations. When we meet someone who is part of them, what we're supposed to do is declare the glory of God. We have a message, and it's a positive message. And so we don't start with, "He is coming to judge the nations." We start by declaring the glory and majesty of God. Why do we need to do this? Well, the why comes in verse 5. Verse 5 says, "For the gods of the peoples are idols, but the Lord made the heavens." Right? So the reason we go and declare the glory of God among the peoples is that they're just worshiping sticks and rocks and stuff. And that's just sad. So we should tell them about God. Now maybe at this point you have in your head some sort of notion about going to far off Africa like we did, or South America, or some far away sort of place where we can declare the glory among the heathens. But we don't have to go that far, do we? We've got lots of friends who worship all sorts of things. Cars. Right? There might be, I understand, a few people in West Virginia who worship football just a little bit. Right? Or their own bodies, or somebody else's body. Or money. Right? We've got a whole economy here founded on the worship of money. So we don't have to go very far. Right? Maybe we don't even have to leave our own house to need someone to tell the glory of God to, because people have forgotten. People have forgotten the glory of God and have turned to the worship of other stuff. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson from Psalm is how to approach God. And this one isn't quite as clear, but it gives us a clear sense, not so much of the details, but of the feeling of approaching God. Honor and majesty are before him. Verse 6. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in holy splendor. Tremble before him, all the earth. So we get this picture. Right, this picture of a great and mighty and magnificent God, and we come humbly before God in praise and in worship, coming to God in this sort of great and yet humble manner at the same time. This is our approach to God. Because finally, in the end, God is coming in judgment. But it doesn't really seem to be bad news. Right? When God comes to judge, even at the end, where he talks more about this, it's largely positive. God is coming to judge the nations, and this might not go very badly. Right? This might be okay. This might even be great and wonderful. Not necessarily for everybody. Right? But on the whole, there's a fairly positive picture of God coming to judge the earth. Them, mostly them, but also us. Generally, however, the Psalms like to think that we get a free pass. Right? We're already God's people. So we have a get-out-of-jail-free card for this one. And God will come and judge them. Right? Now, I know there are other psalms where we don't get any sort of get a jail-free card, but this one's fairly possible. So what we have overall in this psalm is this picture of a worship service. A worship service in some sort of great and magnificent building where we gather to sing the praises of God who is present with us. Right? And we get images of just this magnificent space where people from all over have gathered, right? Where the football fans in Morgantown can use our building because we need a 60,000 seat stadium for our nightly praise and worship service. Hallelujah? Amen. Right. Good, good. Now I realize there are also some of you here who hear praise and worship service and start shuddering to yourselves. Right? Because you're not sort of the praise and worship service kind of people. And others of you might be really excited about this. I don't know. Right? But that's sort of the picture here. And then we go to Luke. And we go to Jesus. Because one of the things that we believe, in theory at least, as Christians, is that God has already come. And so when we go, oh, God will come, we can say, oh yeah, it did already. And so, surely part of our picture of what it's going to be like when God comes should come from what it was like when God did come. I mean, I realize that, right, we also believe that God remains present. God didn't just sort of come and then disappear again. Right? But the actual presence of God on earth in the person of Jesus should give us a clue for what we should really be hoping and expecting and doing. So let's look at these same three themes in the book of Luke. So we start with the nations. And in the story from Luke, the nations come in the form of a centurion. And in order to understand that, we need to figure out what a centurion is. Right? So what's a centurion? You guys are... Axel, what's a centurion?
A leader of it's really hard to explain.
A leader of, you're doing well.
It's a leader of a small...
Well, when you think cent, C-E-N-T, Axel, what does it give you a sense of? Cent. You guys back there, C-E-N-T, cent.
I forgot what
It means like money.
Right, money, right. Why cent, C-E-N-T? 100. Right, 100 pennies to a dollar. Right, so a centurion is the commander of 100. But he's a commander of 100 what? Soldiers. What kind of soldiers? Roman soldiers. So why is this commander of 100 Roman soldiers in Jesus' hometown? Because Jesus isn't Roman. He's an occupying soldier. Right? He is an occupying soldier occupying God's land. Now, if you're an occupying soldier occupying God's land, who do you represent finally?
God.
No. I don't think so. You represent the other side. Who's the other side? Yeah, right? So you're Satan's best friend.
Depends what you mean by occupy, because like Occupy Wall Street, they were claiming it.
Yeah, he was claiming it with his sword and his spear and his 100 soldiers. Right? So this guy represents, right, the bad guys. Ultimately. Right? And not only is he a centurion occupying Jesus' hometown, but he's a slave owner. Right? The centurion had a slave. So what does God think about occupying slave owners? What's God going to do when God meets occupying slave owners? Ooh, this is going to be good. Right? This is going to be like World Wrestling Smackdown. Right? This is going to be like God dropping down the big kick from on high sort of thing going on here. Right? But right away, our picture gets more complicated. It's fine, but for the first 4 verses, it's nice and easy to hate this centurion, and then it gets complicated. So this centurion has a slave whom he cares for. Well, that's just odd. He cares for his slave. He cares for his slave enough that he sends for Jesus to heal him. So that's a bit, right? That sort of throws off our picture a bit. And then this centurion knows about Jesus and asks for his help. Well, that's a bit odd. And he does this in a socially appropriate way. He doesn't go himself, he sends intermediaries. That's the right way to do things in that society. Right? In that kind of society, for a centurion, his best way is to send an intermediary. And the people he sends are the Jewish leaders. So he is friends with the Jewish leaders, and they vouch for him. They say, he's a good guy. He built our synagogue. How would you feel if Morgantown Church of the Brethren, the construction had been paid for by one of Satan's minions? I'd feel a bit odd. Hopefully it wasn't. I don't know, I wasn't here. Right? So this man, right, started out really nice and simple. Right? He was the ultimate bad guy. And suddenly he gets a lot more complicated. So here's our nation. What is God going to do when God meets the centurion? So that's the first question. So then, the second thing we noticed in the psalm is how to approach God. So the centurion has to approach Jesus. And he does this politely, correctly. But you don't see a lot of sort of bowing and scraping and worship the Lord in holy array sort of stuff. I think it's worth remembering how much Jesus affects the way we understand God. Right? Because the psalm is right. Right? In its own way. Right? Worship the Lord in holy majesty, bow down before Him, sing praise, bring an offering, right? That whole thing. But what if your picture of God is Jesus? People didn't come to Jesus like that. They walked up to Him and said, "Hey, Jesus." And He went, "Hey." This was people approaching God. And insofar as Jesus represents, right, God for us, is God for us, suddenly we go from the psalm, right, 60,000 seat praise and worship music to, "Hey, Jesus, things are tough today. Hey, Jesus, had a good day today. Hey, God, how are things?" It's just worth once in a while remembering how much Jesus affects the way we understand God and the way we approach God. So this God is confronted with one of Satan's minions on earth and comes in judgment. But there's not a lot of smiting that goes on. And Jesus is ultimately upset with Israel. He says, "Hey, Israel, how come I don't see this much faith among you guys? Centurion seems to be doing fine with his faith. He's got plenty. Satan's minions, they got tons of faith. Not so much in Israel." But even then, we don't see a lot of smiting. Jesus seems to be disappointed. Stuff happens and Jesus is disappointed. Jesus says, "That's unfortunate. I thought you guys would be doing better." And that's sad in its own way. Right? But it's still better than smiting, I think. Right? I don't know. In some ways, disappointment can be really hard too. So how do we get a lesson out of all of this? The lesson I want to pull from this today is just to ask you the question, do you care for your slaves? And the obvious answer is, well, you don't have slaves, but you do have people in your lives who do the same tasks. Slaves were the largely unnoticed people who did all the stuff that nobody else wanted to do. And there are probably people like that in your lives. Do you know the names of the people who clean your offices at work? Not just their names, but their kids' names and how the kids are doing. Those are the slaves of the modern system. Right? All these people who wander around through buildings and clean things up after the rest of us. Or maybe you are one of those people. And then the question is, do people notice you? Do people care about you? Because even the centurion cared about his slave. Are we that good, or is God also disappointed in us? Is God saying, hey, you know, you're not even up to Satan's minion level yet. Right? It's time to bump up your game a bit. Right? Do you know the people? When you go to a restaurant, do you look your waiter in the eye and say, good morning, good afternoon? Say, thanks for the service. Leave a tip that's noticeable. Leave a tip that's more than noticeable. I once heard a sermon from a Canadian sociologist, and he said that in his research he found that the time of the week that waiters hated the most was Sunday after Sunday lunch, because Christians didn't tip worth a darn. Church people, they went to church and they gave some at church. Right? They put their dollar in the offering crate, and then it didn't have to go into the tip. Right? Do we care about our slaves? Have we hit Satan's minion level yet? Or hopefully we've ridden them away. At home, do we notice when things get clean? Do we notice who does it? Do we help a little bit? Not that I'm asking any of the young people this at all. Right? Happened last week in my house. Deb came and said, so, how do you like the way the living room looks now? Oops. Does it look different here? It looks really nice, yeah. It's embarrassing, isn't it? Right? To know that someday we may rise to the level of Satan's minions. Right? But we can. Right? And we can rise higher. With a little help from our friends and a little help from God. Amen.